Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. How's everybody doing this today? All right.
He started again.
Who
Jojo.
did? I have no idea what you're talking about. Biden. What do you mean?
Vice President Trump.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, let's take a look at some headlines across the globe. Of course, we've been looking at the United States and their run-up to elections this November. And current president, I almost gaffed and said something else. Current President Joe Biden has had a few gaffes of his own. I don't know if you were listening to the speeches he made off the back of the NATO summit, the meeting. He held some form of a press conference and he made two small but significant mistakes. Let's take a listen.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, so I think she was not qualified to be president. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
You know what I liked was that President Volodymyr Zelensky, he did not move until that correction was made. He stayed where he was until he caught himself back up again. And I think, these things happen. In that situation, President Biden was able to catch himself almost immediately and say, I'm just so focused on rooting out Putin that I made this mistake. Right? And then thereafter, he made another gaffe where he referred to his own vice president as Vice President Trump. Again, these are people who are talking a lot. As people who are professional talkers right here, we do slip up on words too. Nobody is calling for our heads. So this is what has happened with President Biden. So that's the first lot of stories. I'm coming. That's the first lot of stories. Just looking at what President Biden has spoken about. We know that he'll be making another interview on Monday, and that's going to be very interesting because that's going to be unscripted. That's going to be another instance where some of the naysayers, like Mr. Hosseini to my left, will be able to listen to what President Biden says in a situation where he's not speaking, it's not sitting in front of friendly fire and he doesn't have a teleprompter. So we'll see how Monday goes. Staying on that, there are lots of Democrats who aren't impressed by any of these antics. They do think that this is just another example of President Biden struggling with his own physical strength. And that has called some heavy-hitting Democrats to the table. We've got the likes of Nancy Pelosi and, of course, former President Barack Obama. It's been alleged that they're huddling and they're discussing plans in which they can find a way to get to this presidency to become for the Democrats to remain in power, to stay re-elected, and it's going to be quite a challenge for them. The chorus of House Democrats, of senior Democrats across the board, wanting President Biden to step down is getting louder and louder. So this is the situation we're finding here. President Biden has insisted that he is determined to keep running. He says that only God himself can change his mind as it pertains to the decision to stay in this race or quit. And then lastly, as we look ahead to next week's Republican convention, I believe it will take place on Monday or in the next 3 days or so. You've got the fact that Republican lawmakers are doing some caretaking for former President Donald Trump. Former President Donald Trump is also somebody who speaks quite brashly. I think we're spending so much time looking at President Biden's gaffes and talking about whether or not he has the gusto to go up against President Trump. I think sometimes it does attribute a lot more validity to President Trump than may be deserved. This is somebody who makes a lot of gaffes, who makes a lot of untrue statements that can be and have been quite dangerous, not only to the country's democracy, but just to this entire process as it stands. So you've got the likes of different Republican lawmakers making sure that they're taking a good keeping their ears to the ground with this NATO summit, and they are reassuring Republican voters and different European leaders. You've got Viktor Orbán currently in the States. I think he met former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago just in the last 24 hours or so. And you've got Republicans discussing about how, sometimes former President Trump, he just says things, he doesn't mean them. And they were talking specifically about former President Trump's comments when it comes to leaving NATO. He's threatened many times to withdraw the United States from NATO, and these Republican lawmakers are telling voters that no, that's not what he means. So I think on both sides you've got people who are doing cleaning up for their premiers and making sure that their candidates are presenting the best foot forward. So I don't think that this is a situation where it's one candidate being completely overshone by the greatness of another. It's just that we're looking at this through different lenses.
Maybe I'd like to say this. I've got nothing against Biden.
I know.
Truth is, the biggest losers after this election will be called in November. Who do you think will be the biggest losers?
I don't know.
The American people. Because it's never been this terrible for them. Where they have to choose between Biden, that adulthood has set in big time, and a pathetic, pathological liar called Donald Trump that has constantly always lied his way and feels very entitled. So either ways, Americans are the losers. Secondly, either ways, the Democratic Party is in dire straits. If they change Biden, it's easy passage for the Republicans because they're going to hound them to the high heavens. If they keep Biden, it's also terrible problem for the Democrats. So either ways, it's a zero-sum game, almost a zero-sum game for the Democrats. And that's why they're scampering around. Femi, there's a difference between Freudian sleep and repetitive cognitive issues. There's a difference between Freudian sleep and repetitive cognitive issues. So we have seen to a large extent that what is happening to Biden might not necessarily be Freudian sleep.
Ayo, do you agree?
So let me just finish my point. Might not necessarily be Freudian sleep, but it's up for the doctors. I don't have the bona fide to say that because the doctors will have to decide that.
Right.
Whatever they come up with, but the American people will not take a chance on somebody that has questionable cognition.
Let's see.
That's just it to a large extent. I've been reading Axios a lot lately. You need to hear stories about him trying, from 8 p.m. you can't have his attention.
Well, I think that, that is definitely something that many people
and his party is not
even
behind him any longer.
So, I mean,
but
he definitely still does
but
have
for me,
support.
the greatest losers will be the American people in this.
I see. What are your thoughts?
All right, so according to German Chancellor, slips happen all the time. And if you monitored people's speeches, you would hear more than enough slips of the tongue. And I say this because if you look at it, to be honest, he wasn't talking about statistics. He was just missing or giving someone else a name. Even our parents would say, hey, Adefemi, Kemi, before they arrive at your name.
I mean, like, I get called all of my different names.
I do believe that because there's a lot of attention on President Joe Biden, people are a bit more critical. Right. Him referring to Vice President Kamala Harris as his rival Trump, Vice President Trump, or calling Vice President Trump, I would say that if you have a name on your mind consistently, of course it's easy, and it's the same thing with Putin, and he was able to immediately recover. I'm not even sure it was because people had alerted him to that fact. He was able to recover, and a few world leaders have come out, including Emmanuel Macron of France, have come out in his defense to say that it's okay to make these mistakes. And I say this, and I remember also our own elections when the current president made a number of mistakes. And so I think it shouldn't be judged on the merit of just the fact that you can make mistakes. I don't think we should be expecting the president.
Bush made a lot of
I don't think we should be judging a president because he makes mistakes, especially not on key issues. If it's on names, I don't think it's a big deal.
So,
the debate, he lost his train of thought.
Yes, that one. Democratic voters will see what's happening with President Biden and decide not to vote for their candidate and vote for the opposite party because he's made a few issues, made a few gaps?
A latest Ipsos poll, which shows that the Democrats are divided right down the middle. 58% saying that President Biden should stand down. 42% supporting him, saying that it does not matter. But the Democrats will have to take a decision between August 19 and 22 when they have their convention to declare their candidate for the election. The situation in which they have found themselves is not just the division within the party, it's also that the donors are pausing the donations. They're saying, well, they are waiting to see what will happen in August. It's also that the bondlers, the people who raise funds for the party, they are saying that people are no longer picking up the phone calls. What has triggered all of this is President Biden's performance at the debate in June, with President Trump. Now, the issue is his age. Is it one? The second issue is his mental acuity and his verbal miscues. And yesterday, you were referring to the conference. That solo conference was organized to showcase him, to show that he's okay. But the very first question in that 1 hour long conference, press conference that was held, he said, he referred to Kamala Harris as a Vice President Trump. Earlier in the day, at an event, a NATO event that was specially organized to promote Ukraine, he referred to President Zelensky as President Putin. Zelensky has to say, well, I'm better than him. And he said, oh, yeah, you are much better. He corrected himself.
Right.
On not knowing who his vice president is, look, he had to say, well, listen to that. The final question, and he just walked away. So the issue is about his age. And age is a factor in the American electoral process. Indeed. Maybe there are lessons that we can learn from this. It wasn't an issue in the UK election, but what we see is that age, mental acuity, is an issue in American election.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to some news headlines across the globe, looking at newspapers now. We'll start with This Day. The front cover of This Day, as you've already been discussing, looks at a host of issues, but the biggest one is the Supreme Court saying that it is in fact an act of gross misconduct by allowing local government allocation through the different states. You guys have gone back and forth. I know the analysts on Daybreak have also debated this at length, but that is the biggest story coming out, and it's also reflected on a lot of different newspapers this morning. That being said, if we take a look at the front page of The Guardian are looking at the deplorable state of meat handling facilities, abattoirs as they're pronounced here. And it's actually quite a serious story, because when you read the actual article which this caricature illustrates, it speaks about this being a national issue. It's not just focused on one area of the country. They look at regions in the north. They even look at an abattoir down here in Lagos and talk about the risks associated with poor sanitation. The handling of meat without due care will trigger, hopefully not inevitably, but serious healthcare concerns. We are already looking at cholera being an issue, not only in Lagos, across the country, but what a risk that could emanate from this is definitely foodborne diseases and strains of bacteria that could be hard to contain. So there is a big push to be mindful of personal sanitation, but also the sanitation as it pertains to food products being bought and sold across the country. From The Guardian, let's take a look at The Vanguard. And The Vanguard, very interestingly, are taking a look at executive order that was signed by the president just a few days ago, looking at the promotion of pharmaceuticals and medicines in Nigeria. And drug makers have said, listen, we are with you. We absolutely want to see Nigeria's local production capabilities increase. However, in order for us to do our job, we need to do your job. So they're calling for a stable Naira. And they say, unless that Naira is stabilized, this dream of reaching 70% of local production and pharmaceutical manufacturing will remain a mirage if that's not targeted. From The Vanguard, let's take a look at the front page of the New Telegraph. And they are looking at stories that we've already taken in different papers, but also one thing that jumps out is they have quoted President Tinubu's latest update when it comes to this dispute over the national minimum wage. And essentially, President Tinubu is telling organized labor that their request of 250,000 naira a month is unrealistic and has advised them to go back to the drawing board. They will be joining forces again in this coming week. It'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that will be. To the Daily Trust now, and the front page of the Daily Trust looks at, again, a host of stories, but one thing that jumped out was that the detention of former Power Minister Saleh Maman. He has been remanded in a prison in Kuje, I believe. He fell or had some sort of issue before going into the courtroom. There was supposed to be some situation where he might have fainted or taken ill. He walked into the newsroom doused in water. The judge had asked him what was wrong. Is this a weather issue? And he was able to enter his pleas of not guilty. He is charged with 12 counts of money laundering, and these relate to a 33 billion naira fraud. It is worth noting that Salamaman, along with, I believe, the former Minister of Agriculture, are the only two ministers under President Buhari to ever have been fired. And he seems to be participating in some theatrics in this court case. Lastly, take a look at the front page of, I believe it is the Vanguard we're looking at. Is it the Vanguard? We have got the Punch, and the Punch is looking at these University of Teesside Nigerian students who are stranded to some extent in the United Kingdom because they've been expelled from the university, and then there's this discrepancy over fees and what's happening there. So these are our stories. Dr. Rubin, what would you like to comment on first?
Okay, very quickly, just to comment on the ruling by the Supreme Court. I've raised legalistic questions earlier on about whether the Supreme Court can rewrite the Constitution. My own understanding, I may be wrong, is that the job of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution, which is the ground law, not to write a new law. But I know there are talks about judicial activism and all of that. So that's one question we can investigate. But I want to talk about people who are likely to be really celebrating or laughing. One, Justice Begore. Justice Alpha Begore's committee, in fact, originally recommended financial autonomy for the local councils. Number two is the point I made about irony, that President Tinubu, as governor of Lagos State, he created SCDAs. And President Obasanjo, I think at the time, withheld allocations to those SCDAs and said, look, a state government cannot be controlling funds for local councils. So wherever President Obasanjo is now, he'll probably be drinking palm wine and saying, look at this Tinubu. When I took that position many years ago, he went to court, he won. But
now look,
we're back to that reality. Just those two, ironies.
In defense.
I'm sorry, Rufai. I will take a few more papers and then I'll come back to the both of you for comments. Let's take a look at the front page of the Daily Nation in Kenya. And they are looking at all of the different ministers who have lost their jobs after William Ruto has decided to clear out his entire cabinet. This is going to be a huge win for protesters, Gen Z and otherwise, who have been calling for a total overhauling of their government. They do not believe in William Ruto's leadership. They don't believe in his cabinet, and as a way to appease this huge cry of criticism, of calls for change, William Ruto has taken this drastic move to fire his entire cabinet. I mean, this is a major shift in terms of protesters being able to demand some form of accountability from their leadership and then being able to see it in real life action. So this is what we're seeing in Kenya. And then if we move to the Daily Graphic of Ghana, they take a look at manufacturers, about consumers complaining about the lack of transparency as it pertains to cement and the purchasing of that. So those are two stories looking at what is happening across the African space. Of course, in Kenya, we're looking at the protests, and in Ghana, we're looking at calls for making cement pricing more transparent.
So in this one, I want to defend President Tinubu. In defense, Dr. Abati, of President Tinubu. Don't look at me that way. A man has a right to vacillate from time to time. He can change his thoughts. He can change his opinion whenever it's politically expedient. The time of Olusegun Obasanjo, it was politically expedient for President Tinubu to create more LCDAs then, and to also use the current Attorney General to be able to fight his case in the courts. But now, it's no longer expedient, so he has a right to change his mind. So all you people that are against my president, people like Dr. Abati, please, I have a right to change my mind. President Tinubu has a right to change his mind.
I'm not against the president.
I'm
just pointing out ironies.
I know you pointed at the irony. We have pointed at the ironies back. This is the defense,
What are your thoughts on the papers?
No, I just wanted to say something again also on Kenya.
Okay.
I do not trust Ruto. The cabinet is Ruto. Ruto is the cabinet. If these same cabinet members that were unruly and that the Gen Z are talking about, it is Ruto that put them there in the first place. The main question should be, is Ruto ready to go? Is he ready to put himself up for an election and test his popularity with the people? If he's changing cabinet, it's nothing, because he will still put in people there. He will still placate them. And the youth, like they say in local parliament, they made a hole in neck well. This is the only time you can get him. Once he comes off this, he's going to have a big crackdown I don't trust him.
All right. I mean, let me start with the Kenyan story. In terms of trust of Ruto and his actions, I do think that despite the fact that, yes, he appointed the first set of cabinet ministers. Yes. By the way, he didn't let go of the foreign minister. That's the only person that was let off. But despite the fact that he was one that appointed them in the first place, I think the body language and the messaging in his actions is what would actually inspire trust in the people, and the fact that sometimes people just want to feel like they are being heard. Even if it's just a ceremonial action and you would still put back your people, the fact that the young people feel like they protested against something and he's listening to them and taking action in that line is good enough in terms of leadership. I believe that it will make him, this will actually, if he handles this properly, he might very well emerge out of this crisis as a hero. Agreed. And I think that the actions he's been taking. And finally, let me just talk about the fact that the meeting of the president with Organized Labour, TUC and NLC presidents, just to say that even though he said that we should be realistic, to balance it, he had also said that Nigerian workers deserve improved welfare, yes, better wages, as well as safe and enhanced working conditions. Indeed. Just to put it there. So he was speaking for the, yes, workers, but he was defending the workers, but he was also saying that they should be realistic in light of what's happening.
Indeed. So we'll see what happens next week. We've got a few more papers from different regions. If we look at the front page of the Daily Express, they've actually made a very clear call for the banning of crossbows. And that is because there is a man pictured, well, he's holding a crossbow. That's not the gentleman who's triggered this move, but there is a gentleman in the United Kingdom who's now in the custody of police after allegedly using a crossbow to kill his former girlfriend, his former girlfriend's mother, and his former girlfriend's sister. 3 women dead through the alleged use of a crossbow. So there have been calls in the United Kingdom to ban them because they are easily acquirable and clearly deadly. Moving on from the Daily Express, we're still talking about crime, prison population. The Daily Mail, it says that Labour has been accused of using scare tactics over this prison crisis. The overcrowding has been a long-running issue. And then finally, on the Daily Telegraph, violent criminals, they could be released earlier. I know yesterday we were talking about rather than serving 50% of your sentence and then going for parole, it could be a situation where some criminals are being allowed to leave after serving 40% of their sentences.
Well, thank you so much, Femi. Always great touching the different parts of the world. Always. And just bringing out headline stories from there. Thank you. See you on Monday.
See you Monday.